Yeah, I think my dad really enjoys it. He's been a mechanic his whole life. I think he enjoys the job satisfaction of it when the car's finished and done, but he genuinely just hates cars.
How brands like Bugatti have built their legacy by controlling every detail, every narrative, and every flaw long before it reaches the public eye. For years, their cars haven't just been machines. They've been untouchable icons, engineered to exist in a world where mistakes are invisible and exclusivity is everything. But what happens when that illusion cracks? Not quietly, not privately, but in front of millions of people watching in real time. This isn't just a story about a damaged Bugatti Chiron Purr Sport. It's about what unfolds when control slips, when transparency replaces secrecy, and when a single decision turns a hidden incident into a global conversation no one can pause. Because once the process is no longer hidden, the questions become impossible to ignore, and the answers even more uncomfortable. What followed that moment was something the hypercar world had never really faced before. Instead of quietly disappearing into a controlled system, the wrecked Chiron Purr Sport re-entered the spotlight through an unexpected choice by its owner, known online as Fxalexg. Rather than closing the chapter with insurance and moving on, he pulled the car back into his possession and set in motion a chain of events that would challenge one of the most tightly managed ecosystems in the automotive world. The real turning point came when the car was handed over to Matt Armstrong, a creator known not for secrecy, but for showing everything. And this time, everything meant exactly that. Every bolt removed, every damaged component exposed, and every problem faced without filters. As the rebuild began to unfold online, something unusual started to happen. Viewers weren't just watching for entertainment. They were analyzing, questioning, and comparing. Hypercars like the Chiron Purr Sport are often described as too complex, too precise, too specialized to be repaired outside official channels. Yet here was a process, documented step by step, suggesting that while the engineering is extraordinary, it is still, piece by piece, understandable. That alone was enough to shift perception. It turned a private repair into a public experiment, and more importantly, into a test of long-standing assumptions. For a company like Bugatti, this created a situation with no easy response. Traditionally, any issue involving one of their cars is handled quietly, and preserving the image of flawless engineering and absolute control. But this time, silence wasn't the only risk. Visibility itself had become the problem. As the project gained momentum, the narrative began to move beyond a single rebuild and into something much larger, a question of whether manufacturer authority is as absolute as it appears. When mate Remac publicly addressed the situation, emphasizing safety and the extreme complexity of the car, it added legitimacy to Bugatti's concerns, but it also intensified the spotlight. Now, instead of a one-sided story, there were two perspectives unfolding side by side. On one side stood a global brand, built on precision, expertise, and strict control. On the other, an independent builder demonstrating progress in real time and challenging the idea that such work is impossible without official oversight. And with every update, the gap between what is claimed and what is shown became part of the narrative itself. As more of the car came apart and slowly returned to life, the conversation began to evolve. It was no longer just about whether this one vehicle could be repaired. It became about the structure of an entire industry, how much control manufacturers should have, how much freedom owners truly possess, and where the line between safety and restriction actually lies. Other hypercar makers, like Koenigsegg, have reportedly taken steps in the past to keep damaged cars out of public circulation entirely, precisely to avoid scenarios like this. But that context only made Bugatti's earlier decision to let the car pass through auction feel more significant in hindsight. And that single moment, seemingly minor at the time, changed everything. Because once the car entered the open market, the story was no longer contained. It became accessible, visible, and ultimately uncontrollable. In today's world, where platforms can turn a single project into a global event, that loss of control carries consequences far beyond the original incident. As millions followed the rebuild, the audience itself became part of the story. Discussions spread across comment sections and forums, turning passive viewers into active participants. People began asking questions that rarely surface in such a closed industry. Are strict repair policies always about safety, or do they also protect business models? And should ownership include the right to repair, even for something as complex as a hypercar? These aren't simple questions, but their scale and visibility marked a clear shift. At the same time, it's important to recognize that Bugatti's position isn't without merit. Cars like the Chiron Purr Sport operate at extremes where even minor errors can have serious consequences. From that perspective, tight control over repairs isn't just about image, it's about responsibility. But what this rebuild has done is place that argument in direct comparison with observable results, creating a dynamic where claims are no longer accepted without scrutiny. What makes this situation so compelling is that neither side can fully control how it's perceived. Every update from the rebuild acts as a real-time response to the concerns raised by the manufacturer, while every statement from Bugatti invites deeper analysis from an increasingly informed audience. It's no longer a closed loop, it's a live, evolving conversation. And as the car moves closer to completion, the focus is shifting once again. It's not just about whether it can be rebuilt anymore, it's about what that outcome represents. If successful, it could redefine how people think about ownership and capability. If it fails, it may reinforce the importance of manufacturer oversight. Either way, the impact is already in motion. Because this was never just about one car. It's about what happens when a system built on control meets a world driven by transparency. And once that process begins, there's no simple way to reverse it, only to adapt to what comes next. What makes this moment even more significant is how it's forcing a quiet but important shift in mindset. For decades, owning a car from Bugatti meant accepting an unspoken agreement. You don't just drive the machine, you operate within the boundaries set by the people who built it. That structure created consistency and ensured that every car bearing the badge met an almost mythical standard. But now, with this rebuild unfolding publicly, that agreement is being questioned in a way that feels both subtle and irreversible. The visibility of the process has introduced something that rarely exists in the hypercar world: relatability. Not in the sense that the car itself is accessible, but in the way people can now follow its journey. They can see the setbacks, the unexpected complications, and the solutions being worked out step by step. Yes, through the lens of creators like Armstrong, what was once hidden behind factory walls is now exposed to anyone willing to watch. That changes how people connect with these machines. It removes just enough mystery to replace blind trust with informed curiosity. At the same time, it's also changing how companies are expected to respond. In the past, maintaining silence was often the safest option. But today, silence can feel like avoidance, while speaking out can unintentionally amplify the situation. When Remac addressed the concerns around the rebuild, it highlighted just how delicate that balance has become. Every word is analyzed. Every claim is compared against real-world evidence, and every response becomes part of a much larger narrative that the company no longer fully controls. And this creates a new kind of pressure, one that isn't just about engineering excellence, but about perception. Because in a world where millions of people can watch a car being rebuilt in real time, reputation is no longer shaped only by what a company says, but also by what people see. And what they're seeing is a process that challenges the idea of exclusivity as something that must remain hidden to be preserved. It also opens the door to a broader conversation that extends beyond hypercars. The idea of ownership is evolving across industries, from technology to machinery, and now even into the most exclusive corners of the automotive world. Questions about the right to repair are no longer limited to everyday products. They're reaching machines once considered untouchable. And while that doesn't diminish the expertise of manufacturers, it does change how that expertise is positioned. It becomes part of a discussion rather than the final word. In many ways, this situation represents a collision between two different eras. One where control, privacy, and authority define the relationship between brand and customer, and another where openness, access, and shared knowledge are becoming the norm. Neither side is entirely right or wrong, but the space between them is where change happens, and that's exactly where this story exists. As the final stages of the rebuild approach, there's a growing sense that the outcome, whatever it may be, is only part of the story. The real impact has already taken shape in how people think, question, and engage. It has shown that even the most exclusive systems are not immune to disruption, especially when visibility replaces secrecy. Now, and perhaps that's the most lasting takeaway. Not whether the car runs perfectly again, but how a single event managed to pull back the curtain on an entire philosophy. Because once people have seen behind it, even briefly, they don't forget. And from that point forward, the conversation is no longer controlled. It's shared.